Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Fred Kemp. I'm President and CEO of the Atlantic Council. And thank you for coming to this address by Asian Development Bank President Takehiko Nakao on Asia's economic outlook and the role of the Asian Development Bank. President Nakao is currently visiting the U.S., like so many others this week, in connection with the annual meeting of the IMF and the World Bank. We've been reading reports of political risk, downward look of growth because of political risk in the West. We've been reading reports of the high debt area. But what we're really interested in hearing from you is the way you look at this as the recently re-elected president of the ADB. You've just extended for another 5 years, so we extend to you our congratulations on that, and we look forward to working with you over this period of time. We thank you for coming to the Atlantic Council and sharing your perspectives on the Asia regional economy and the contribution the ADB is making to development, poverty elimination, and economic growth in Asia. It seems apparent that we are in a potentially transformational period where there's a big opportunity to pursue common interests between Asia and the United States, but there's also a risk of fragmentation. We put out a report last week, Global Risks 2035, written by our own Matt Burrows, where he considered the most likely scenario going out to 2035 as something he called fragmented world, which was multipolarity with weakened multilateralism. Certainly we have to worry a little bit about the fact that that might be the outcome and then try to counteract it. The Asian region remains dynamic by global comparisons and growth in other respects as well. Despite a recent economic slowdown in the region, there appears to be a modest uptick in growth in Southeast Asia and sustained growth in India. I think numbers just came out today, 6.9% if I'm not mistaken. Though there's reason for optimism, some economic forecasts for the region highlight downside risks, including from China, where efforts to transition to a new normal, as it's been called, face challenges, and China's moderating economy could have and has had spillover effects in neighboring countries. More generally, China is playing a larger role in shaping the global economic order, which we've been looking at, which is what is going to happen to the global system. And I'm sure there'll be questions about that for you. And China is calling for adjustments in the existing economic and financial architecture. New regional incentives, initiatives supported by China, such as the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the AIIB, the New Development Bank, and the Silk Road Initiative are showing momentum. I anticipate that President Nakao will provide his perspective on these developments and his long-term vision for the role of the ADB in promoting economic growth in Asia. Within the ADB, President Nakao has undertaken a number of reforms to strengthen the financing capability of the ADB as well as the effectiveness of its project development. Importantly, you've also sought to reach out to the AIIB and form a collaborative relationship with that institution, which could be something of a model going forward, and so we look forward to your thinking on that as well. This event is part of the project on shaping the Asia-Pacific future, led by Scowcroft Center Senior Fellow Olin Wethington, who, by my measurement, is one of the most interesting and well-informed actors and thinkers on this set of issues. Olin previously served as Assistant Secretary for International Affairs at the U.S. Treasury and Special Envoy on China, among other positions. The project focuses on the economic and financial architecture in the Asia-Pacific, and it's part of our larger efforts to take a look across the Atlantic Council at the liberal international order that was created after World War II and what direction does it all go in now. Before I hand off to our speaker, I'd like to further introduce you just with a few words. President Nakao was appointed to his current position in April 2013. Prior to that, he served in Japan's Ministry of Finance for over 30 years including as Vice Minister for International Affairs and G20 Finance Deputy. He's also very familiar with Washington, having worked at the IMF and the Japanese Embassy. He's a graduate of the University of Tokyo and of the University of California, Berkeley, where I think you have your MBA, if I'm not mistaken. And we ask you to forgive us for whatever influence we've had on your thinking from Berkeley. After President Nakao's remarks, we'll continue the Q&A session moderated by Olin. This session is on the record. We have a live stream audience online as well. President Nakao, the podium is yours.
I was thinking of speaking from the chair, but I thought this is better for if it is live recorded. Thank you, Mr. Kemp, to invite me to this distinguished institution. And I'll speak today about Asian economic outlook and also some issues about the global economy. And I'll speak about what the ADB is trying to do. And maybe the third point is what is our relation with China, including ADB's positions vis-a-vis AIIB. And finally, I'd like to speak how the U.S. involvement in the MDB's multilateral development banks issues and the Asian affair is crucial. As before. First, about the Asian economy. There is a discussion about secular stagnations, and Mr. Professor Summers talks a lot in the Foreign Affairs magazine that we are facing the kind of secular stagnations, which was before the in 19th century and early 20th century, there was also discussions of secular stagnation. I think for developed economies, it can be true to some extent because there is more saving than investment, and lower interest rate is not just a phenomenon after the global financial crisis. I'm starting believing that lower interest rate, lower inflation rate can be a new normal for the developed countries. Not necessarily bad things, because some services are free, like Wikipedia, and we cannot capture the whole welfare gain by the GDP number. But also it is true that we have more saving by pension, life insurance, and so on, or sovereign wealth fund. And I think there are more people who are willing to save than to consume or invest. People want to save more for the future, for pension and for the commodity exporting countries. They want to save for the future generation. So generally, it's not shortage of a saving, but it's a more, more than needed saving for the world. So it's an important question. But as far as Asia is concerned, Asia's growth has been very solid, even after the global financial crisis. Asia's growth rate has been coming down because of a lower growth rate of China, but still it keeps a growth rate of about 6%. And as Mr. Kemp already mentioned, I would say the growth momentum in many Asian countries are picking up instead of coming down. India is now growing at the pace of 7% to 8%, and Indonesia is regaining the momentum after the kind of shock for lower commodity prices. And Bangladesh is also growing at the rate of 7%. And these economies are very big economies. Myanmar is starting opening in 2012 by the support of the US and other countries. The sanctions are being removed, and Myanmar has a population of more than 50 million. So Indonesia, Philippines, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Vietnam, Myanmar, these countries are gaining more momentum of growth. And they are not just dependent on the economies of the advanced economies, they are now having a stronger consumers base with the middle class emerging or growing. But China is, of course, slowing down. And China's growth was more than 10% before the global financial crisis. But they are now adjusting toward more, harmonized society with greater attention to climate change and commodity consumptions. And they cannot continue to grow at the pace of 10% when they reach per capita GDP of $8,000 a year. So they are now going to a slower growth with the more attention to environmental issues and consumption and service instead of the investment and manufacturing. But still they are having a growth rate of 6% or more. But of course, there are challenges to them, whether they can adjust to this new situation, new normal quickly or not, and whether they can expand their service sector as they expect. And also there is issues of adjustment after the overinvestment in cement and steel and coal and so on after global financial crisis. And they are now looking at whether they should do it again, facing the lower growth and so on. But anyway, my message is that as far as Asia is concerned, Japan is growing slowly because of aging and decreasing working age population. But as far as other countries, emerging economies are concerned, they are strong, generally speaking, except that China is slowing down. What is ADB doing? ADB was established in 1966, and at that moment there was question, skepticism in the United States. We have already World Bank. Why do we need ADB in Asia in addition to the World Bank? But at that moment there was already Inter-American Development Bank. Maybe there was outcome of some political negotiations, and also there was also African Development Bank. So why not in Asia? And the United States started looking at this idea, which was proposed by Japan, Japanese and Indians and Indonesians and so on. The United States looked at this case more seriously after they started involved in the Vietnam War more seriously. So if there is an intervention in military way, there should be intervention through more financial and economic ways. But at that moment, China was not ADB's member. And India refrained from borrowing from ADB because India is such a big economy, and if they start borrowing from ADB, the financial capacity of ADB would be evaporate easily. So at that moment, ADB, when it was established in 1966, it was mostly for ASEAN countries to support ASEAN countries, which is in a sense counterpart to communist countries like China, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, and so on. And it was not lending to India. It was lending to Pakistan and Bangladesh. And Iran didn't join the ADB, although it was a part of candidate countries. ADB's membership was limited to ECAFE, which is a kind of Asian version of United Nations. United Nations overreach to Asia, which is in Thailand. The membership is already defined, and Iran was a part of it, but not the Middle Eastern countries west to Iran. So Afghanistan and Iran can be a member. By the way, you have already circulated the paper? Not yet? Jinda-kun, it's not yet? So please look at the membership if you can get it later. But anyway, the idea of ADB is to have a membership among Asian countries, which are defined by the UN agency up to Iran. And then So in the beginning, it was more about ASEAN plus some South Asian countries, but China became member in 1986. But at that moment, efforts were made to keep Taipei China. So we named it Taipei China instead of Taiwan or Taiwan China or whatever, but it became mainland China. China became member in addition to Taipei China and Hong Kong China as a separate memberships. And Central Asian countries became members in 1990s after the collapse of Russia, Soviet. And those Central Asian countries became members to ADB as well as to European Bank of EBRD, Reconstruction and Development. So, and also Pacific countries became members gradually. So now ADB covers 48 Asian regional countries, including Australia, New Zealand, and Japan, which are not the borrowing countries from the beginning. 45 developing countries, already Hong Kong, China, Taipei, China, Singapore, Korea graduated from borrowing from ADB. But Korea, I should have mentioned this, but Korea was very important borrowing countries in the beginning. So these are the history, and the ADB is now trying to expand our lending capacity by 50% to from about $13 billion a year approval to $20 billion a year approval by combining our concessional lending window like IDA of the World Bank with the ADB main non-concessional basis. And so by using our equity, existing equity more efficiently, we are now trying to expand our lending operations from $13 billion approval a year to $20 billion a year. You have already papers or not yet? In our operations, China is still important recipient, about 13 to 15% of our lending, and India is more than 15%, the biggest borrowers. But we are also supporting Pacific Island countries. Afghanistan is a very important country which receives a grant money from us. And our operations are focused on infrastructure like energy and transportation. And the transportation includes the road and railway. So essentially, ADB is an infrastructure bank like AIB. But we are also supporting education, especially the TVET. TVET is technical and vocational education and training. And we are doing some work like condition cash transfer to support the poor villages in Philippines, Bangladesh, and Pakistan, and so on. Because of AIB, in a sense, we are asked to do things better in a more efficient way. So to me, AIB, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which was proposed by China, is not kind of a competitor or a kind of a rival, but it is more the corporations, the partner to make an investment in infrastructure in Asia. Asia needs a lot of finance for expanding infrastructure investment. Infrastructure is a basis of economic development, but also it is a basis for social activities like education, health. We need a road to go to hostel. Women need good transportation to work in the cities. So infrastructure is not just a basis for economic development, industrial development, but it is also basis for social development, and we are supporting these things. And we want to make it more efficient and effective. And we must increase our knowledge base. The World Bank is now trying to change the system from regional-based departments to knowledge-based kind of global centers. We still keep a regional arrangement. There is a table, a chart to show our organization in page 14. And our system is based on the regional departments of East Asia, South Asia, Central West Asia, and Pacific Asia, Southeast Asia. If you look at page 14's charts of the organization. But there are many organizations which are related to administration's independent evaluation strategy, anti-corruption and integrity. There is also department for several departments which are related to safeguard policies of social and environmental impacts. But anyway, our system is more based on the five regional departments plus the private sector operation department, which is lending to private sector and investing in private companies. But we should also look at the sectors and themes. In page 15, I show the groups to cover sector and thematic issues, and we should share the knowledge and build up knowledge regarding such sector like transport, urban, water, education, finance, and so on. Page 17 is the reform efforts. But anyway, because of AIB, there is more incentives urge for us to make us better. And we are also expanding our lending to climate issues, and we are doubling the climate finance, both for mitigation and adaptation. We announced it last year ahead of a COP21 meeting in Paris. And also sustainable development goals. Last year, the UN agencies, UN assemblies leaders endorsed sustainable development goals, which are now replacing Millennium Development Goals. That includes poverty reduction, but also gender, climate change, urban issues, and food securities, and so on. And ADB wants to play an important role, crucial role in Asia to do that. Our lending, once again, is like now we are heading toward the $20 billion approval. But the need of infrastructure in Asia is estimated to be $8 trillion a year for 11 years. So it is like $800 billion. So $20 billion is still very small, but most of those financing needs is met by the budget, taxpayers' money, and bond issuance by the government. And China is about half of that requirement. So $20 billion still is a very important kind of the seed money to mobilize other resources. AIB is now trying to start business, and it will be maybe $3 billion a year or so in these first years. And $20 billion of ADB is still much greater financing than AIB. About China, about AIB, we already, I had a very good talk with the Mr. Jin, president of AIB. Last year, I met him 3 times, taking several opportunities. He came to annual meeting of ADB in Baku, May last year. And I visited his office in Beijing in September. And I met him several times in other opportunities. And we are discussing how we can recruit better staff. What should be the benefit package, including pension, whether it is defined benefit or defined contributions. And he knows many things because he was vice president of ADB before. I didn't work with him, but I have known him for years. So what I want to say is we can cooperate. And we gave a lot of knowledge about safeguard policies, environmental impact and social impacts, legal issues, and charter is very similar to the charter of ADB in the first place. And we set MOU for corporations, and we started co-financing. The first project of AIB was with us. World Bank, ADB, and EBRD co-financing is the way that they start operation, because they still have only 50 or 70 staff at this moment. They are starting recruiting, but ADB has 3,000 staff, including 1,000 or more international staff or professional staff. So to work with the AIBs to the benefit of all stakeholders. For AIBs developing member countries which are borrowing from AIB, it's better that the ADB is involved in those lending to keep international standard of procurements and safeguard policies for environment and social impacts. And also it's to the benefit of shareholders like European countries, Australia, and Canada to have ADB as a partner. And for the United States and Japan, who are not joining AIB, to cooperate through the ADB or the World Bank together, also using maybe USAID or JICA bilateral agencies should be a way to cooperate with the AIB. And we are continuing to lend to China. There is an idea in the US Congress especially that we should let China graduate as quickly as possible. But China wants to borrow from us. China wants to be a partner with the ADB. So when I go to China maybe twice or 3 times a year, every time I'm invited to have a dinner with Minister Lo Jue to discuss many issues, fiscal issues, environmental issues, and so on. For China, this is a very small money compared to the needs of their financing. But by using our lending to China as a kind of a leverage to do good things like climate change issues, water, urban water issues, and very poor villages, they can use our resources as leverage to ask the SOEs, state-owned enterprises, and regional governments to do right things. And it's maybe good source of influence for the Ministry of Finance of China. So, and also our lending to China is not subsidizing. It's a lending based on the interest rate, which is our funding cost, which is issuing bond, plus spread. So we are making some spread profit, income by lending to China, and that income can be used to finance our cost and also to transfer to the operations for poorer countries with a more concessional rate, and also grant operations. So, and also lending to China is good for keeping our AAA rating so that our funding is easier. Of course, India is important, other countries are important, but if we lose China in our portfolio, maybe rating can be challenged. So, and also more than anything, to engage with China through ADB is a very efficient and less costly way of engaging China in a positive way. So this is my strong belief. Sometimes American, US authorities say we should let China graduate as soon as possible because of a request of the Congress. But basically, I agree with the US authorities not to agree. So agreed not to agree is an attitude about China's between the US authorities and the ADB's management at this moment. But I believe engagement with China through ADB is to the interest of United States also. And finally, I would like to mention that the involvement of the United States in multilateral development banks affairs, international affairs, is so crucial. And there is the idea that, as Mr. Kemp said, we are now heading toward more multilateral system than US-centered system. It may be true, the U.S. Relative size of economy is much smaller than after the World War II, and maybe military strength. Yeah, it is very strong, but anyway, there are many other ideas and many more centers in the world. It is true, but the U.S. still has trust by countries around the world, whether they are allies of the United States or not. The U.S. Influence over the world affair, whether it is geopolitical issues or economic issues, financial issues, or the kind of social issues or ideas and so on, or innovations, technologies, still is very crucial. And some people say that I was the Vice Minister of Finance, so I was dealing with the currency issues. But I strongly believe the US dollar would remain the single most important key or key international currency for foreseeable future. If the US policy remains reliable, more reliable than others, and the financial system is open enough and also very developed, and if the US keeps geopolitical strength, the US dollar will remain the key currency for foreseeable future. Renminbi can play a certain role. Euro has been playing some role, and the yen plays also some role, and pound sterling plays some role, but the US dollar will remain the central key currency for foreseeable future. So I hope that the US would engage in the international affairs in positive ways with a confidence. We cannot just let the world decide themselves without the involvement of the United States. And of course, allied countries or international community at large should make contribution to the maintenance of international system together with the United States. So although Mr. Trump says that Japan is not paying for the security arrangement, but Japan gives bases to the US Army and also pays for supporting it. A lot of money is paid for supporting base maintenance of Japan. So countries should be also ready to support the role of the United States. So because this is a more geopolitical issue than the financial, I mentioned a little bit about political issues. So this would end my first remark. Thank you very much.
President Nakao has agreed to take questions and answers, or questions, he'll provide the answers, I should say. And let me add my word of appreciation for your being here today. I take note of your comments at the end calling for a strong leadership role on the part of the United States in the multilateral development banks. And I think many governments, it's been my observation, in the region share that aspiration. They also share the vision for a rules-based, market-oriented, inclusive economic order. And believe, I think, that multilateral lending institutions like the ADB should be part of that system. Let me begin picking up on that thought with a kind of Washington question, because I think sometimes within our politics we are somewhat reticent when we consider U.S. leadership in MDBs because of fiscal considerations. In other words, we assume that leadership requires new money. Certainly money is an element of MDB operations. It is central. But let me ask you, if I could, to begin this Q&A, Nakao-san. What is in your judgment, the resource adequacy now of the ADB? Are we facing, do you think, in the medium term, a need for a new capital increase? The last one, I think, was in 2010. Or is the ADB on a kind of plateau of self-sufficiency as far as its capital base is concerned? And are there options that do not require a new capital that would increase the lending capacity of the institution? Its equity to loan ratio is, I would say it's lightly leveraged, maybe half of what commercial banks operate under. So share, if you would, please, your thoughts on the adequacy of the ADB's capital base going forward.
Thank you very much for that question. I think World Bank, ADB, and AIB, all these banks should increase our lending capacities and to support infrastructure investment, and also to support when the money is needed for addressing financial crisis. So we supported Kazakhstan's budget difficulties after lower commodity prices. We are supporting Mongolia. We are ready to support other countries for financial crisis, not for BOP, balance of payment difficulties, because it's areas of IMF, but we need to support countries when they face abrupt shortage of fiscal money because of lower commodity prices or other crises. So there are many things World Bank and ADB, EBRD, and so on should do. And for that purpose, as you said, we need more lending capacity, and lending capacity is defined by paid-in equity plus surplus. We need more capital, in short. But capital can be leveraged through issuing bond. So relatively, MDB is less costly than grant operation, bilateral grant operations. So if you look at page 9, or if you have a paper, equity over ordinary capital resource, ADB's the main resource is page 9 of the paper, and equity is 17 billion, and out of which paid-in capital is, as two asterisks shows, only $6 billion, out of which US contributions is like 15%, 60%. So it is only $1 billion accumulatively the world, US has contributed to ADB as a capital. And we leverage it by issuing bond, and our outstanding lending is $62 billion at the end of 2015, while equity is 70 billion. 70 billion equity is from paid-in capital plus reserves, which is from income accumulation. But regarding lending capacities, because I thought G20s are now requiring using our balance sheet better, we decided to combine equity of ordinary capital resource, which is equivalent to IBRD or the World Bank, with ADF loan outstanding. Equity is 30 billion. So combining two equities, equity will become like $50 billion. And by using leverage for both non-concessional lending and concessional lending, we can increase our lending capacity by 50% without capital increase, without asking shareholders to give money. So we did it, but it doesn't mean that we don't need capital increase further. And capital increase is needed in the future. And also to let emerging economies make more contributions, we need to have a capital increase. By having capital increase, we can ask India and China make a greater contribution. So capital increase is important, but at this moment, because of this merger in 2017, we'll start this, and we will have a bigger equity. And concessional lending window didn't use leverage at all. It didn't issue bond, which is very strange as a financial institutions. but IDA over the World Bank and ADB and others didn't use leverage, believing that lending to poorest countries is not credit worthy. And also we could afford it because those countries were small, but we cannot afford it. We cannot lend concessional money to Vietnam just using capital. We should use our bond leverage to do that. And so we decided to combine it. And this is a model to other MDBs by doing that, by using our balance sheet better.
Yes, I think that was a very creative initiative, and I would predict that your tenure will be noted for that creative way of enhancing the ADB's capital base. Why don't we take questions from the audience? Yes, sir. You'd state your name and affiliation, please.
Thank you. I am Ken Scabe from CSIS. Mr. Nagao, so you mentioned about the corporate side between AIB and ADB. And meanwhile, can I ask about the crucial difference between these two banks, which you recognize? Thank you.
Please, yes.
Yeah, there are several differences. One is AIB is to devote to infrastructure building. And as I said, although we are also focused on infrastructure, and in the beginning it was about irrigations and how to avoid starvation in Asia. So anyway, infrastructure is very important sector for us, but we are also supporting social sectors like education, health, and social protection, and so on. That is one difference. And there is a very clear difference about the ideas of governance. AIB doesn't have a resident board. ADB has a resident board, which means directors of the board live in Manila, and 12 directors and 12 alternate directors are appointed by the shareholders of 67 countries. US has one executive director and one alternative executive director. Japan also has it, and China also has single constituencies, and other countries have a kind of a constituency electing executive director and alternate. We have this system, but AIB's idea is they can go without a resident board. The idea is to make a system less costly. So Mr. Jin believes that to have a resident board is so costly for offices and travelers and so on, so they can do through email communication. That is one difference. And also another difference is we have 29 offices in 28 countries of borrowing countries, and in Vietnam, in Indonesia, India, and so on, we have a staff of 60 to 80, including local staff, to communicate daily and to implement project for through procurement and so on. So that is another difference. They want to do it without a resident mission. ADB started without ADB resident mission, but over years we found that it is so important to have offices close to the authorities.
Do you think AIB will move to that model eventually?
I don't know, but that is a big difference. About the safeguard policies for environment and social impacts, I think they want to have a standard similar to the ADB and World Bank. So I don't think they would, they don't adhere to these standards. They would adhere to that. Otherwise, why do they need to establish such a bank? It should be international bank. The difference is about governance. And but my view is Mr. Jin often talks about this, and I had a good discussion with him. But for him, efficiency is so important. Cost efficiency is so important. I can understand. We should make our system more efficient, budget efficient, and so on. But at the same time, from my perspective, development institutions like ADB and AIB have so many objectives. Each shareholder has a different view about development. Some countries look at the gender issues as a very important priority. Some countries regard road project is so important. Some countries want to do more about the education and health. So even if we are institution, each shareholder has a different view, different focus. In case of private sector, it is profit based on certain welfare of the employees and the community. But our idea, ADB's objective, development institutions' objective can be so different, and NGOs, civil societies are behind it, and communities are behind it. So we need a lot of discussion within the bank. That is my idea. If we try to communicate with the 67 shareholders, it's a tremendous difficulty. We need negotiation discussions in the institutions. And another difference is that they are seeking a bigger membership. They are now saying that there will be 100 members. We try to keep our membership to the countries defined as Asia by United Nations, and also countries which have ability and willingness to support Asia. So it is a more traditional membership, so we don't include Middle Eastern countries, Africa, or Brazil, or Russia. Of course, if there is a support by shareholders, we can do it. But so far, we have kept our system, our membership, more limited to those countries. That is another difference.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to give a shout out to Skip Orr for his recent article on resident boards. It's very good. But I'm going to call on Bob next for a question. Bob Bastani, here in the front. Yeah.
Thank you.
And then 2 rows back. You're next, sir.
President Ikawa, I'm Bob Bastani. I'm a professor at the National Defense University, but I was a director general at ADB for 6 years before you arrived. As you know very well, all of these development banks were designed to be self-sustaining and to finance themselves from their own operations. I'm curious as to your perspective on this, considering that interest rates are close to zero, yield curves are flat. How can ADB and the other development banks raise the money that they need to operate from operations as opposed to eating up capital, and what this suggests for your future credit rating?
Please.
Thank you very much. Once again, the main operations of us is not concessional, and that is based on the idea that we have a capital, and we finance our lending through bond issues, and we will make some income, which can be kind of increasing the capital base. So as you said, even without replenishment of capital increase, we can continue to increase our operations through the bigger capital, through the income. But at the same time, we have had several capital increase in any institution, World Bank and ADB, EBRD. All these institutions have had capital replenishment, capital increase. So your ideas of self-sustaining is not, I don't think it's a norm. We have always thought about how to increase our capital through more capital contributions from shareholders. So we are trying to make income, and it can be a part of a capital base so that we can issue more bond and lend more. But we also need a capital increase. And we are lending to those middle-income countries by the interest rate of LIBOR plus 50 basis point, which means we can make money, and then income will make our capital increased. But at the same time, it's better to have some capital increase, asking shareholders money from time to time.
Good.
So it's not self-sustaining, in my view. It's not? No. We have had a capital increase over years. In any institution, World Bank is not trying to do it again, and we have had several capital increase.
Yes, sir. 2 back.
Me?
Yes.
And thank you, President. I have one question I would like to raise.
I'm not sure your
what's
mic is on, sir. It's hard to hear.
Can you?
Okay,
It's
There,
better.
that's
it's
better.
better. Yeah,
Yes,
I'm
very
Won Jun
good.
Hong from Taiwan, and I have one question for Mr. President. What's your view about the relation between the Silk Road Economic Belt and the 21st Century Maritime Silk Road and the AIDB? The relation between the Belt and Road and the AIDB. Do they propose specific industrial policy proposed by China?
Yeah, one road, one way initiative by China is about the kind of a Silk Road on the sea side and also the Central Asia side. And actually, ADB has been promoting this kind of ideas for years. We have a CAREC initiative that is Central Asia Regional Economic Corporations, and including China and Central Asian countries. And also we have great Mekong sub-regions initiatives, including Indochina's countries and two provinces of China. So we have been promoting these kind of ideas. Similar, but we started these ideas earlier, but China is now trying to promote this kind of idea. So in short, we can cooperate, but at the same time, we cannot work as a kind of the arm for Chinese ideas. China has its own ideas about these regions, and it is based on their industrial interest to sell more products to these countries when they have a more overcapacity and so on. So we can cooperate as appropriate, but we cannot, ADB is not doing everything together with them. As appropriate, as needed, we can cooperate.
Right. I would flag myself the geopolitical significance of what China's policy banks are doing in the One Belt, One Road context, because those volumes now are becoming enormous. And I would regard them as outside the established system, without discipline on terms, without compliance with, I would say, international standard with respect to procurement. And the volumes are in excess now, even among your borrowing membership, of what the ADB provides. And so I would suggest the geopolitical significance of that is quite large. Yes, why don't we take two more questions? I want to be cognizant of the time. We'll do a question here, and is there another one? And then we'll ask you to go ahead, sir.
Okay, thank you. I'm Dave Rabinowitz. I'm retired, and I was wondering if you could give us your idea of what is likely to happen with ADB and its members, depending on whether TPP is approved or rejected by Congress. What impact is that likely to have?
Of course, most of Asian countries who want to be a TPP members want to have this one, and Vietnam and Japan and these countries are so keen about this issue. But if the Congress doesn't support it, we should take it as a kind of a reality. But TPP is not only one way to promote trade, and we have already bilateral arrangements, and trade regime are becoming more open anyway. And I would like to say that Washington Consensus, which is, as you said earlier, the promoting open system of investment and trade, sound macroeconomic policies, sound financial system, and so on, and less regulations, privatizations. These are the secrets of Asian growth. I don't agree to the idea that Washington Consensus is an American idea and the Asian development is based on the different ideas. Asia started growing very fast after they became more open, the trade and investment regime. It's very clear about China after Deng Xiaoping's reform agenda, even before that. And Vietnam started doing more toward the end of 1980s. India, Indonesia once had a more, state-guided approach, and a lot of SOEs based on maybe socialist ideas and also anti-colonization idea. But Asia started growing very fast after they started open the system and privatize systems. So my answer is, of course, if a TPP is established, it's better, and we can include more countries to that framework. But now, if the U.S. doesn't support it, we should make other efforts, continued efforts to keep trade and investment regime open. And Indonesia, India are making serious efforts to further opening the system by lowering the threshold of the investment, and also by deregulating the system.
Thank you very much. We promised to get you out of here at 3 o'clock, and we've exceeded that, I'm afraid,
okay.
but just by a few minutes.
Yeah, that's okay.
Do you have time for
one
more question?
One or two,
One or two, if there is.
Is there any question from ladies? Because I'm always keen about gender balance.
Okay, well, let me thank you then. And we appreciate your being here, your candor on the record. And let me, if I could, put in a commercial for an upcoming Atlantic Council Scowcroft Center report on revitalizing the MDBs. And the targeted release date of that is in the month of December. So I hope you'll be on the lookout for it.
Yeah,
Please, yes.
About MDB's roles, it's related to your question, self-sustainability and also graduation. If all Asian countries become developed, do we need ADB? Maybe not, but for climate challenges and so on, we still need a lot of intervention by the public sector, including multilateral development banks. And MDBs are relatively efficient ways to do many things, although we must make efforts to make our system kept efficient. And so there was the idea that banks and private sector financial institutions can do everything. But I think we need a still public system to take care of strong investment in infrastructure, mobilizing more resources, leveraging more private resources to address financial crisis. We still need MDBs. I don't know about 100 years later, but I'm not responsible for that issue anyway.
We frequently hear reference to the fact that there is more capital than there are bankable projects. And that suggests perhaps a role for the Asian Development Bank on issues of governance, rule of law, the character of the investment environment. And that's a contribution to the rules-based inclusive system that goes beyond capital. I mean, linked to capital, but it seems to me a very important role that the ADB has to play in Asia.
So it's easy to say that there is more capital in the advanced economies, and there is more need for capital in developing countries by connecting the life insurance money and pension with the development needs of our countries. We can make a system better, the world better. It's not so easy to find a bankable project for life insurance company to invest in the 50 years infrastructure project. It's not so easy. So we cannot be over-optimistic about it. But as you said, by stronger governance and rule of law and the more stability in the regulations and so on, dispute mechanism, we can have more resources coming from private sector to important infrastructure work. So PPP is one opportunity. We cannot optimistic about the PPP's use. The fiscal money, taxpayers' money by countries, developing bond market of the government is also important. But there are many things ADB and other institutions can support the development of those things: governance, bond market, tax